Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about how to winterize your indoor bonsai. So it is that time of the year again where the seasons are changing, the growth season definitely is coming to an end, and it is time to think about how we can best prepare our indoor bonsai for the cold season. What I'm going to talk about today in this video is how to understand the needs of your indoor bonsai when it comes to the colder season, what environmental factors play a part in when winterizing your indoor bonsai. Additionally, I want to look at topics such as fertilizing and watering in the colder season and how, with regards to pruning or repotting, you might want to treat your trees in the winter. So definitely a lot of topics to cover, and I would say let's start right away with how to understand the needs of your bonsai. So the needs of your bonsai, of course, are very much dependent on the environment you keep it in. So they will also change with changes in the environment. And of course, a seasonal change is probably one of the bigger changes you can get in the environment. And even though you keep your tree indoors, this change will affect your tree. The sunlight will be less strong, so it might get to a point where your tree does not get enough natural light any longer, and you might need to substitute even with artificial light. Or you might want to position your tree inside your home to a place where it simply gets more of the natural light still. So probably you can actually experience a lot of those seasonal changes on your tree. I have, for example, here my privet bonsai, and I do see already that it starts to change the way it looks now that the colder season is almost here. So I see a lot of dieback on some older leaves while new growth is still showing. I had that also in the last year where there is a lot of new growth, for example, coming here from all the way down at the stem, while all the leaves that have been maybe 2-3 years old are starting to get brown and die off. So it is simply the way this tree reacts to the cold season. Then I have other trees like two ficus varieties that I have here that often don't show any changes when it comes to the foliage. While other ficus that I have, for example, drop their leaves or a lot of their leaves. So they turn yellow and drop a lot of their leaves when the cold season starts. But that is very much dependent on your tree. So even within a certain variety or a certain species, you can get differences in how they react to colder weather. So I would say changes in the foliage are the best indicator that you can see on a tree when it comes to seasonal changes. And I wouldn't say you should be too concerned about it. So if your tree is losing a lot of foliage at that time of the year, that is normally not a sign that your tree is dying. It is simply adjusting to a different environment and how it can best fit into that environment. Maybe it is dropping those leaves because it wants to conserve its energy, also because, of course, the tree also realizes changes in environments, changes in the surrounding. It needs to adapt to those environmental changes as well. So when it comes to looking at the needs of your tree, it is simply that, looking at your tree and seeing how this tree is changing itself. And then, of course, you need to adapt your care that you offer for your tree to the way that the tree is changing. So what does this care involve? And that already brings me to the next stage, the environmental conditions. Of course, when you see your tree is changing, you also need to take a look at the environment you keep your tree in. And even though we are in an indoor setting with our bonsai or our indoor bonsai, it can be that there is changes also coming with the change of season. I already mentioned that light definitely is an important factor that you should keep in mind with regards to the seasonal change. But also, for example, humidity is something that many people do not right away keep in mind when looking at their indoor bonsai. So in winter, we do tend to have a more dry air also in our homes. Many of the indoor bonsai varieties you can get are either tropical or subtropical trees that do need a higher humidity than normally you have, especially during the winter months. So what you can do first of all, of course, is, for example, purchase a hygrometer that shows you the humidity in your home, and if it is at a level where it is good for you, for your flat, and also for your indoor bonsai. So of course you need to find this balance there. Additionally, to create more humidity just around the tree, you could look into something like a humidity tray where you fill a tray with, for example, stones, and then cover those stones with water and place your tree on that tray. So the water then on this tray will slowly evaporate and create higher humidity around the tree. Of course, this is not doing miracles around your tree, but it can definitely still be beneficial for your tree. So if you see your tree struggling with low humidity, which could be, for example, seen by soil drying out very fast or leaves turning brown and crispy and falling off. So there is a lot of factors that show you that maybe humidity is simply not the best for your tree. And that is definitely something that you need to be more concerned about in winter than normally in summer, where humidity in general is simply higher and better fitting for most trees. So environmental factors like lighting, the humidity, but also, for example, cold drafts that can happen in your house is definitely something you need to keep in mind. Cold drafts meaning that, of course, windows, they might not be insulated the best way, so you have cold drafts from those windows, and that definitely can affect the health of your tree by this cold draft or cold wind the entire time that a tropical tree, of course, won't find that nice and that's perfect to thrive in that environment. So if you can see a tree that shows signs of deteriorating health, simply check around. Is there maybe a window nearby that it has a cold draft that can affect the tree? So again, very much looking at the tree, looking at the environment and seeing where there is things that could bring some disharmony between those two factors. Apart from adjusting the way you look at your tree, the way you look at the environment, of course, also one thing that is very important is the way you take care of your tree. And the big two factors there are watering and fertilizing. With regards to watering, I don't want to generally give you the idea that you need to water less. This very much depends, first of all, on the tree, the soil you keep your trees in, and the humidity, as we already said, in your household. So with watering, again, it boils down to simply looking at your tree, figuring out how often the soil dries out and how fast the soil dries out, and adjusting your watering schedule to that. So it definitely will have some adjustments because simply there is so much changes also again in the surrounding of the tree. But again, this is not something you can say for each tree or for every tree in general. So this is very specific about the tree, where you have it, in which soil you have it, and simply then adjust by having a close look at your tree. The same goes for fertilizing. If you see still growth, I wouldn't say you need to stop fertilizing completely. I do have trees that show some growth through also the winter, mainly ficuses. I have that situation that some of them keep growing, though of course way slower than they do in summer. But as they are still growing, of course, I also fertilize them. They will need the nutrients to form new leaves and to grow, so I will give them also those nutrients. If you have a tree that goes basically completely dormant, you can reduce it, definitely the fertilizing, to maybe once a month or even less than that. But I think you don't have to completely stop with the fertilizing. So those are tips that probably you are aware of anyway, but a thing that I still want to mention is repotting and pruning, because that might be something that is not that obvious when it comes to your trees in preparing them for the winter. So what I normally do before the growth season starts is really take a look at my trees and see, is there any pruning work that still needs to be done. An example for this is my ficus that you can see here with the little accent stone inside. A couple of weeks ago I went in, I really looked at the foliage, at the branches that have formed, and I cut back those branches where I had the feeling that they have reached a stage where for this growth season I'm happy with them, and I can cut them back to a point where I see that I can work from that in the next growth season onwards. So where I simply want to have new growth showing in the next growth season. So I went, for example, here on this new branch that has formed over this growth period, and I cut it back because I was quite happy with the length of it. And next season I want to work on the side branches. So I went, for example, this way. I had other trees where I went in and I cut off dead branches that have formed over the growth season. So simply clean up work when it comes to pruning. I wouldn't do any structural or hard pruning necessarily, but just keeping the tree compact, really removing any of the growth that has formed that is not really needed for the intended design you have for the tree. That of course you should do before really the growth season is over or before winter actually starts then. Another thing also that you should keep in mind is repotting. And of course, indoor bonsai, I do try to repot them in spring, but it might be necessary to still do it in the beginning of fall. So for example, this little ficus microcarpa here that I have purchased this growth season actually only came still in very dense and not well-fitting soil. And for the beginning I thought maybe I keep it over the winter, but I saw while having it in my house that it simply took a very long time, even in growth season, to dry the soil. So I'm sure it would have suffered from that in the winter, because of course soil like that could easily lead to root rot then in the colder season. So I did still repot this starting this fall, simply because I saw it would benefit from it. And you can see it basically has not shown any sign of deteriorating health since then. It actually has a lot of new growth forming still. So sometimes even at this point, at this stage, for an indoor bonsai, it does make sense to repot. Of course, I'm talking very specifically about indoor bonsai here, because for outdoor bonsai it could be actually the wrong time and will actually kill the tree if you repot it at this time of the year where it still has some growth maybe going on. So indoor bonsai where we do have an environment that is somewhat more stable, normally you can repot also throughout the year and also, for example, in fall. And it might benefit your tree if you can see that the soil it is in right now is not fitting, if it is completely root bound, for example. So definitely then there is a good chance that repotting will actually benefit and make your tree healthier. So another thing I want to talk about is trees that are not tropical or subtropical and how you should treat them. So this goes a bit in the direction of which environment you should keep them. And I'm specifically talking about Mediterranean trees like olive or pomegranate, because those trees, they do need a dormant season. So you cannot really keep them over winter in the normal area. I mean, you can, but normally their health does get affected by that. I actually keep mine on my balcony over winter, just closer to the wall so they don't freeze. And they have been doing great. So I've been doing that for 3 or 4 winters now already, and they always bounce back healthier than before. There is some dieback on lower branches, but a lot of new growth in the next growing season then. So it definitely seems to really benefit the tree by giving it the possibility to go into dormancy and then come back with so much more energy then again. If you, of course, don't have a balcony where you can do that, maybe you simply find the coldest room in your flat. Maybe you have a basement where you can put it in, or a garage. Normally that is already enough, where it still has enough protection from freezing temperatures, but it is cold enough for it to go into somewhat of a dormancy where it simply can rest and then have all the energy it needs again for the next growth season. So basically, to summarize, I would say it is very much about looking at the tree at hand, looking at the signs the tree gives you, at the signs the changes in environment give you, and trying to find harmony and balance between those two factors. So if you see your tree is reacting in one way, but the environment seems to change in a way that might be detrimental to the health of that tree, then of course the situation shows you that you need to act and change either the environment or the way you take care of your tree, and simply bring this back into a balance. And then of course also your tree can be healthy throughout the cold season and have then the perfect start for the next growing season. So hopefully this video gave you a good idea on how to take care of your tree when the seasons are changing and the cold season is starting. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did so, feel free to leave a like. And of course, if you enjoyed this channel, feel free to subscribe to it. Hopefully I see you in the next video then. Until then, goodbye.